A millionaire marries a McDonald's waitress on a bet and gets surprised. The city lights sparkled outside Ethan Carter's penthouse. Inside, the air buzzed with laughter, music, and the clinking of expensive champagne glasses. The party was grand, just like everything else in Ethan's life. He was a self-made millionaire, known for his charm, good looks, and reckless attitude. Sitting on a leather couch, Ethan leaned back as his best friend, Damian Blackwood, poured him another drink. Damian was a billionaire's son, spoiled and arrogant, always finding ways to stir up trouble. "You think you've done it all, Carter?" Damian smirked, swirling the liquid in his glass. "Tell me, is there anything left that actually scares you?" Ethan chuckled. "Please, there's nothing I can't handle." Damian's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Let's make things interesting then. I dare you to marry someone completely opposite to your world. Someone poor. Someone who works a normal job. Live with her for 6 months. No luxuries, no special treatment. Just you and her, like an ordinary married couple." The room fell silent. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's ridiculous." "Too scared," Damian taunted, smirking. "Come on, Carter. Prove to us you're not just about money." Ethan glanced around. The others were watching, waiting for his reaction. He could never turn down a challenge, especially one this bold. He had spent his life proving himself, showing the world that he was unstoppable. He smirked. "Fine, I'll do it. But I get to pick who." Damian grinned. "Nope, I pick." Ethan hesitated for a second, but his pride wouldn't let him back out. "Deal." Grinning wickedly, Damian grabbed his coat. "Let's go, then. Time to find your future wife." It was past midnight when they pulled up at a 24-hour McDonald's. The smell of fries and coffee filled the air as Damian scanned the small crowd. Then, his eyes landed on a young woman behind the counter. She was Lena Brooks, mid-20s, simple clothes, tired eyes. She looked like she had been working long hours. "There," Damian said, pointing at her. "She's the one." Ethan sighed. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope. Either her or you back out." Backing out meant losing. Ethan never lost. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. This was just a game, right? A harmless bet? Lena turned as he approached, tired but professional. "Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?" Ethan leaned on the counter, flashing his famous smile. "Actually, I have a different kind of offer." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Sir, if this is another complaint about the fries, I want to marry you." Silence. Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" Ethan grinned. "You heard me. Marry me, for 6 months. I'll pay you." Lena stared at him, completely stunned. What kind of joke was this? She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. Lena blinked at the stranger standing in front of her. "What did you just say?" Ethan leaned against the counter, completely unfazed. "I said marry me. 6 months. I'll pay you $500,000. She let out a short laugh, shaking her head. "Okay, that's funny. You want fries with that?" "I'm serious," Ethan said, his voice smooth, confident. He pulled out a sleek black card from his wallet and placed it on the counter. "Take a day to think about it." Lena glanced at the card. His name, Ethan Carter, was printed in expensive gold lettering. She had no idea who he was, but he certainly looked like someone who belonged in a world of money. His watch alone could probably pay her rent for a year. Still, this had to be a joke. "Listen, I don't know what kind of game this is, but I don't marry strangers." Ethan smirked. "Everyone has a price." That made her blood boil. "Not me." She turned away, trying to focus on her work, but something gnawed at the back of her mind. What if he was serious? Her life wasn't exactly easy. She worked double shifts just to afford rent. Her mother's hospital bills were piling up. No matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. $500,000. That money could change everything. She looked back at Ethan, who was watching her with that same amused expression. "Why me?" she asked. "Because my friend dared me to marry someone ordinary, and you happen to be here," he said bluntly. "Simple as that." Lena scoffed. "Wow. Romantic." "I'm not asking for romance." Ethan's tone was casual, but his blue eyes held a challenge. Just a contract. 6 months of pretending. And then we both walk away. Lena swallowed. This was insane. But so was her life. She thought about her mother, who needed better medical care. About how tired she was, working late nights, barely making ends meet. 6 months for $500,000. Could she really do it? Taking a deep breath, she crossed her arms. I want to see the contract first. Ethan grinned. Smart girl. The next day, Lena found herself sitting in a massive law office, staring at a contract thicker than a phone book. Ethan sat across from her, his usual smirk in place. His lawyer explained the terms. 6 months of marriage. No emotional attachment required. Public appearances together. No physical intimacy unless mutually agreed. At the end of 6 months, she walks away with $500,000. Lena tapped her fingers on the desk. And what happens if I break the contract? You don't get a penny, Ethan replied. Lena took a deep breath, her heart pounding. She had one rule. She wouldn't lose herself in his game. With a firm nod, she picked up the pen and signed. Game on. Lena stood at the entrance of Ethan Carter's mansion, her small suitcase clutched in her hand. The estate stretched endlessly before her. A white marble palace with towering glass windows, perfectly trimmed gardens, and a giant fountain that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Everything about this place screamed cold and untouchable. This is home now, Ethan said, walking ahead without looking back. His tone was flat, uninterested. To him, this was just another deal, a business transaction. Lena exhaled sharply. 6 months. Just 6 months. She followed him inside, her sneakers squeaking against the polished marble floor. The grand hallway was lined with massive paintings and golden chandeliers. The air smelled of expensive cologne and furniture polish. A butler in a suit stepped forward. Shall I take the lady's luggage, sir? Ethan barely glanced at her bag, her only belongings. That won't be necessary. Lena lifted her chin. She wasn't ashamed of what little she had. Money didn't define a person. But as she stepped deeper into the house, she felt completely out of place. Ethan led her to a guest bedroom, larger than her entire apartment, with silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a walk-in closet the size of a grocery store. You'll stay here, he said, his voice distant. Lena frowned. And where do you sleep? My room's down the hall. She crossed her arms. Right? Because a real married couple sleeps separately. Ethan smirked. We're not a real married couple, sweetheart. Lena didn't argue. She had no interest in playing the loving wife. She just wanted to get through this. But the first real clash happened at dinner. The long dining table was set with fancy dishes she couldn't pronounce, served by a chef who barely acknowledged her. Ethan ate with perfect posture, bored and detached. Lena, meanwhile, struggled to cut a piece of meat. The utensils were too fancy, the atmosphere too stiff. After a moment, she put down her knife. I'd rather have a burger. Ethan looked up, amused. You do realize you don't work at McDonald's anymore? She smirked. Doesn't mean I stopped liking food that actually has flavor. For the first time, Ethan let out a small chuckle. But their biggest clash happened when she met his friends. Ethan threw a small gathering, or, as Lena called it, a rich people's gossip club. His friends were the elite, men in expensive suits, women draped in diamonds. And they didn't hide their judgment. One of them, a blonde woman named Sophie, smirked as she sipped her wine. So Lena, darling, what's it like going from flipping burgers to being Mrs. Carter? Lena smiled sweetly. Not much different. I still deal with rude customers. The room went silent. Ethan choked on his drink, barely holding back a laugh. Sophie's smile faltered. Well, I suppose money can buy anything these days. Lena tilted her head. Funny. With all that money, you still can't buy manners. Ethan's friends gasped. Sophie's face turned red. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching Lena with genuine curiosity. She wasn't like the other women in his world. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. And for the first time, Ethan wondered if he had underestimated her. The grand ballroom was filled with the city's most powerful and wealthy people. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a golden glow over the elegantly dressed guests. Laughter and polite conversation floated through the air. But for Lena, this was just another night of pretending. The charity gala was one of Ethan Carter's annual events, a night where the rich donated money they wouldn't miss, all while sipping $1,000 champagne and discussing luxury vacations. Lena sat beside Ethan at the VIP table, dressed in an expensive gown he had picked out. She looked the part, but she didn't belong here. A man on stage spoke about donations for an orphanage, thanking everyone for their generosity. But when Lena glanced at the donation list, her stomach turned. Ethan had just pledged $100,000, a huge amount for most people, but for him, pocket change. She leaned closer to him. "That's all you're giving?" she whispered. Ethan smirked. "It's a charity, not a business deal." Lena's blood boiled. He could do so much more, yet he acted as if this was a minor inconvenience. She couldn't stay silent. When the next speaker asked if anyone wanted to say a few words, Lena suddenly stood up. Before she could stop herself, she took the microphone. "I just want to say something," she began, her voice steady. "It's nice that we're all here, dressed in our best clothes, enjoying fine wine, talking about how generous we are. But let's be real, for most people in this room, donating money isn't a sacrifice. It's just a tax write-off." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Ethan's friends stared at her, some amused, some irritated. But Ethan? He just watched. Lena continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I used to work double shifts at McDonald's just to afford my mother's medicine. I've met real people who don't know if they'll eat tomorrow. To them, $100 means survival. But here, people donate 6 figures and act like saints, while they spend twice that amount on a watch." Silence. Then a slow clap. Lena turned. Ethan was clapping, his lips curled into a smirk. Not of arrogance, but of admiration. "Well said," he murmured. And for the first time, Lena saw something different in his eyes. Not amusement, not annoyance, but interest. After that night, Ethan started watching her differently. He noticed how she spoke to the mansion staff. Not like they were beneath her, but like they were people who mattered. She remembered their names, asked about their families, treated them like equals. One morning, Ethan found her in the kitchen, helping the chef cook breakfast. "You're not a guest," Ethan said, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged. "I don't like being useless." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Most women in your position would be out spending my money." "Yeah? Well, I'm not most women," she replied, flipping a pancake. He knew that already. One afternoon, Ethan caught Lena on the phone, talking in hushed tones. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw her face. Soft, emotional, full of love. Later that day, curiosity got the better of him. "Who were you talking to?" "My mom," she said simply. "She's in a care home. I call her every day." Ethan hesitated. He hadn't spoken to his father in years. That night, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he had avoided for too long. Ethan had always believed money solved everything. But as he watched Lena navigate his world with honesty, strength, and kindness, something inside him cracked. For the first time, he wondered, had he been living a hollow life? And more importantly, was she the only real thing in it? The grand ballroom was filled with New York's wealthiest. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, and classical music played softly in the background. Tonight's charity event was another show of wealth, where people in expensive suits and gowns donated just enough to make themselves feel good, without actually caring. Ethan stood near the bar, sipping his whiskey, bored out of his mind. Another night, another event full of fake smiles. Lena, however, was different. She wasn't wearing a designer dress. She had picked a simple, elegant gown. While the other women whispered behind their champagne glasses, she stood alone, watching the room with sharp eyes. At dinner, a well-known businessman stood to make a speech about helping the less fortunate. But Lena noticed something. The amount they spent on this party was twice the amount they were donating. She couldn't bite her tongue. "Excuse me," she said, standing up. "You're saying this event is about charity?" But let's be honest. This is just a party for rich people to feel good about themselves. The room fell silent. Ethan nearly choked on his drink. Sophie, the woman who had insulted Lena before, sneered. How adorable. The former waitress has an opinion. Lena didn't back down. You know what's adorable? Pretending you care about the poor while wearing jewelry worth more than a year's rent. A few people gasped. Others chuckled. Ethan? He was staring at Lena, something flickering in his expression. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Admiration. After that night, Ethan started watching Lena differently. He saw the way she treated the staff, learning their names, thanking them. Something no one in his world ever did. One afternoon, he found her in the kitchen, helping the cook prepare lunch. You know we have people for that, Ethan said, leaning against the counter. Lena shrugged. Yeah, and they work hard. Someone should appreciate them. She handed a plate to one of the housekeepers, who smiled gratefully. Ethan had never even thought about appreciating the people who worked for him. Then there was the charity center. Lena started volunteering at a local shelter using her own money, even though she had little to buy supplies. You could donate $1 million, and it wouldn't make a difference, she told Ethan one night. But if you actually showed up, it would. Ethan had never thought about showing up. And for the first time, he felt empty. All his money, all his power, none of it had made him truly happy. But maybe she could. Ethan hated to admit it. But he was falling for Lena. Not because of the challenge, not because of the bet. But because she was different. She didn't care about his money. She challenged him. She saw the world differently. One night, they sat on the mansion's balcony, staring at the stars. Ethan had never been interested in deep conversations. But with her, he wanted to talk for hours. Do you ever think about what really matters? Lena asked softly. Ethan exhaled. I used to think it was money. And now? He turned to her, his heart racing. This was it. He was going to tell her. But before he could say anything, the door burst open. Damien stood there, smirking. Well, he said. Looks like you're actually playing your role, Carter. Lena frowned. What is he talking about? Ethan froze. Damien's grin widened. Oh, you didn't tell her? How awkward. Lena turned to Ethan. Tell me what? Ethan opened his mouth. The truth was there, sitting on his tongue. But Damien beat him to it. Darling, you were just a bet. A game. Ethan was dared to marry a random working-class girl for 6 months. Lena's breath hitched. She stepped back. No, that's not true. Ethan tried to explain, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes filled with tears. He had broken her. Without another word, she turned and walked out. Not just from the room, from his life. And for the first time in his existence, Ethan Carter felt truly lost. Ethan had never known what regret felt like. Until now. For weeks, he tried to apologize. He called. He visited her apartment. But Lena refused to see him. You used me, she had said, her voice cold. I was just a game to you. No amount of words could fix that. So Ethan did the only thing he could. He let her go. Ethan walked away from his old life. He gave up the bet money, donating it all to the shelter Lena used to volunteer at. He sold his penthouse, distanced himself from his toxic friends, and built something real. A foundation to help struggling women and families. He didn't do it for redemption. He did it because Lena had changed him. And for the first time, he wanted to be someone worth admiring. 1 year later, it was raining when Ethan saw her again. Lena was at the shelter, helping an elderly woman carry groceries. She was laughing, her hair tied back, her eyes bright. Ethan hesitated, but then he stepped forward, taking a bag from the woman's hands. Lena froze when she saw him. I'm not here to ask for anything, Ethan said softly. I just wanted to help. Lena stared at him, searching his face. And for the first time, she didn't see the arrogant millionaire she once knew. She saw a man who had truly changed. And maybe, just maybe, she could forgive him. Lena stared at Ethan, the rain dripping from his hair, his once pristine suit damp and wrinkled. He didn't look like the arrogant millionaire she had married. He looked like a man who had been humbled, a man who had changed. You don't have to say anything, Ethan said softly. I just needed you to know. I'm not that person anymore. Lena's heart pounded. She had spent so long trying to forget him, to push away the hurt. But now, standing before her, he wasn't offering money, or power, or some grand apology. He was offering himself. This time, there's no bet. No money, Ethan whispered. Just me. Asking if you'd give me another chance. Lena felt tears burn her eyes. She had every reason to walk away, to leave him in the past. But somehow she couldn't, because despite everything, she knew the truth. They had changed each other. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't from pain. She smiled. A real, genuine smile. Okay, she whispered. And as Ethan pulled her into his arms, the past faded away, leaving only a new beginning. Life has a strange way of teaching us lessons. Sometimes what starts as a game turns into something real. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. Ethan thought he had everything: money, power, a world at his feet. But in the end, it wasn't wealth that saved him. It was kindness. It was love. It was Lena. This wasn't a story about money. It was a story about change, about redemption, and about how, sometimes, the right person can turn our whole world upside down, in the best way possible. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing content. Let us know in the comments. Would you give Ethan a second chance? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Speech balloon sparkles.